In the long history of Hollywood heartbreaks, the story of Veronica Lake is still the most tragic. This screen siren became iconic for her icy blonde hair draped mysteriously over one eye, as well as for her frigid femme fatales. But inside, the placid-looking lake was aflame, burning far too bright, and when her end came, it was quick and brutal. Like so many Hollywood starlets, Veronica Lake had to invent herself from the ground up. Born Constance Frances Marie Ockelman in 1922 in Brooklyn, New York, her early life was about as far away from the silver screen as you can get. After all, her father Harry, who worked for an oil company, and her mother Connie were strictly working middle class. But then, the girl's ho-hum life took a devastating turn. When Lake was just 10 years old, her father perished in a horrific Philadelphia industrial explosion. Although her mother remarried, moved Lake around from school to school, and tried to proceed like things were normal, nothing was really ever the same again. Perhaps this is why the matriarch began trying to live vicariously through her daughter, and doing it in an incredibly alarming way. The overbearing Connie pushed Veronica into acting despite the girl's protestations, and the immense strain it put on their relationship. Unwilling to take no for an answer, Connie even moved the whole family down to Beverly Hills when Lake was still just 16. All in the hopes she was a star in the making. The women were in for a rude awakening. In 1940, Lake got the break of her life. That year, producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. was on the hunt for a nightclub singer role for his upcoming flick, I Wanted Wings, starring William Holden. The moment Hornblow watched Lake's test scene, he knew she was the girl and hired her for the lead female part. This was going to be it for Veronica at last. But first, Hornblow made one crucial request. Hornblow knew that his new find was never going to make it as Constance Keene. Accordingly, he suggested she use the name Veronica Lake. Besides, Hornblow explained, her eyes were also calm and clear like a blue lake, so it fit perfectly. Lake was still a teenager when I Wanted Wings came out, but she turned into a full-blown star overnight. Although she had never grown much beyond 5 feet in height, audience couldn't help but notice her. As one review put it, she was seductive, mischievous, with a delectable voice and mane. The hype was so big, people called her the find of 1941, before the film even came out. Even so, her burgeoning fans didn't know the nightmare going on behind the scenes. In a problem that would become increasingly pronounced, Lake wasn't very reliable or likable on the set of I Wanted Wings. To be frank, the tiny teenager already had a big attitude. She missed her call time so frequently that director Mitchell Leeson ordered her to stay on set for the whole day so he'd always know where she was. But if Lake was already something of a diva, it wasn't going to get any better. In I Wanted Wings, one scene turned Veronica Lake into a household name. During one day of the shoot, Lake's hair kept accidentally falling into one of her eyes, creating a peekaboo draping effect. Although the self-conscious actress thought I had ruined my chances for the role, her producer Arthur Hornblow, as always, understood the star power in front of him, and encouraged her to keep doing it. What followed was a sensation. Men couldn't get enough of Veronica Lake, but women couldn't get enough of her hairstyle. The I Wanted Wings peekaboo look quickly became all the rage among the stylish set, and continues to be synonymous with mysterious elegance today. Just ask Jessica Rabbit, who sports Lake's swoop too. At long last, Lake was at the top of her game, but she was already getting dangerously distracted. In 1940, the teenage Lake met and fell in love with the art director John S. Detley. Yet, this was no fairy tale. Although Lake was something like 18 years old, Detley was 14 years her senior and much more established in the Hollywood industry. Still, this didn't stop Lake from jumping in with both feet and marrying him soon after meeting him. It all happened way too fast, and boy did it catch up with her. Following the success of I Wanted Wings, Lake's studio plopped her into Sullivan's Travel, opposite actor Joel McCrea, and under hot ticket rom-com director Preston Sturges. The Veronica Lake was officially a star, so everyone expected the film was going to be a huge hit. But when Lake walked onto set the first day, her director nearly gasped out loud. During all pre-production for Sullivan's Travels, Lake kept a huge secret from the cast. She was pregnant with Detley's child. By the time filming started, she was 6 months along, and it was super obvious to everyone, her director especially, what was going on. Maybe she'd done it out of fear of getting fired, but the horrific incident that transpired probably made Lake wish she had come clean. As Preston Sturges stood looking at his lead starlet's very pregnant body, his shock wore off quickly and transformed into intense fury. He was so angry at Lake, the rest of the crew had to physically hold him back from attacking the actress. In the end, Sturges was forced to cleverly hide Lake's condition with body doubles and costuming. But while he succeeded in pulling it off, Lake's own behavior on set was nothing short of nightmarish. At the end of the shoot, her love interest in the film, Joel McCrea, vowed to never work with her again, saying, "Life's too short for 2 films with Veronica Lake." Ouch. Yet, in reality, something much darker was going on. Lake was a reluctant star, but she still drank deep from the cup of fame, both figuratively and literally. Around this time, Lake started drinking heavily, partially to cope with the pressures of Hollywood, and partially because she loved basking in the nightlife. Still, it didn't love her back, and she often showed up for early calls looking rough and thoroughly hungover. And drink wasn't her only vice. Although Lake was in a serious marriage with children, she wasn't spending all her time warming her husband's bed and rocking the cradle. Instead, she took full advantage of her star status, carrying on a series of affairs with likes of Howard Hughes, Aristotle Onassis, and Marlon Brando. Nonetheless, there was one famous man who fit her perfectly. He just wasn't her lover. Hollywood isn't kind to the sweetest starlets, and when word got around that Veronica Lake was as acidic as they come, cast and crews began to turn on her wholesale. Eddie Bracken, who had barely worked alongside Lake in 1942's ensemble flick Star Spangled Rhythm, didn't let his scant experience with the star temper his scathing opinion. "She was known as the bitch," he once said, and she deserved the title. Tragically though, the next dreadful months of Lake's life would make even her most bitter enemies shut their mouths. In July 1943, after having a daughter named Elaine, Lake was pregnant with her second child with husband John Detley. Then, out of nowhere, a cruel twist of fate derailed everything. While working on a set, Lake tripped over a wire and went into labor early, giving birth to a frail baby boy named Anthony. Too vulnerable to survive, Anthony only lived about a week before passing. The consequences were devastating. Both Lake and Detley were heartbroken over the accident, and their marriages simply couldn't survive it. The pair separated the same summer that baby Anthony passed, and made the divorce official before the year was up. Reeling from her loss without many coping mechanisms to speak of, it didn't take long for Lake to start making some very bad decisions. Just months after she lost her child and her marriage imploded, Lake married again, this time to film director Andre de Toth. She would go on to have 2 children with de Toth, a boy named Michael and a girl named Deanna. But if people thought that Lake was going to finally settle down into a semblance of happiness, they were very, very wrong. Instead, chaos came courting her. She began losing some of her star power, and starting in 1944, she made a series of flops. Most infamously, her turn as the unsympathetic Dora Bruckman in The Hour Before Dawn caused the audience to laugh outright at her horrible German accent. Not only that, her appearance in Boston that year for a War Bonds event also left people cold, with one reviewer saying her talk was on the grim side. After a long slide down, Veronica Lake was finally flat on her back. And when her salvation came, it was a double-edged sword. In 1946, Lake got to try her hand at a comeback, in the form of the classic film noir, The Blue Dahlia. In the beginning, it looked like the film had everything going for it. Not only was it going to be famous mystery writer Raymond Chandler's first original screenplay, but Lake was also acting opposite Alan Ladd again, aka one of the few people she actually got along with. Too bad the rest of the production was hellishly uncomfortable. Almost as soon as she arrived on set, Lake made an extremely powerful enemy. Although Raymond Chandler was a frightfully heavy drinker and hadn't even finished the script for The Blue Dahlia when the shooting began, many people in Hollywood still deeply respected him. Only Veronica Lake wasn't one of them. In fact, she didn't know Chandler at all. And one day, she put her foot right in it. Once Lake clocked the fact that Chandler was the greatest mystery writer around, she decided she needed to do a little research. Did that research consist of reading his many novels? No. Instead, she listened intently to the film's publicity director so she could comment on Chandler to the press with as little effort put in as possible. This did not impress the volatile Chandler, but their feud was just getting started. If Chandler had liked Lake's acting, maybe his pre-production quibbles would have dissolved. Well, the opposite happened. Like some of Lake's colleagues before him, Chandler thought Lake's acting style was vapid. Actually, scratch that. Chandler thought everything about her was vapid, and he did not mince words when it came to taking her down a peg. The only time she's good is when she keeps her mouth shut and looks mysterious. Chandler once sniped to a friend while filming. There are 3 god-awful close shots of her looking perturbed that make me want to throw my lunch over the fence. Although The Blue Dahlia was a box office hit, the toils of its production and Lake's animosity with Chandler overshadow her career to this day. It even produced the cruelest insult ever given to Veronica Lake. In the aftermath of the film, Chandler sanctimoniously and infamously dubbed her Veronica Lake. Yet, sooner rather than later, Lake had to deal with much worse troubles than name-calling. In 1952, Lake's whole life went down in a blaze of infamy. After all her flops, money was tight and the IRS seized her family home for unpaid taxes. This would be upsetting for many, but it pushed Lake right off the deep end. She had such an intense nervous breakdown that she completely abandoned her marriage. And boy, do I mean abandoned. Using her pilot's license that she received years earlier, Lake took the family plane, chucked her husband and kids, and flew solo from Los Angeles to New York. She was, by her own admission, completely done with Hollywood, and was willing to do literally anything to get away from its judgmental clutches. As it happens though, that was just the first step in a series of increasingly bizarre behaviors. Eventually she fell into obscurity, until, that is, a New York Post journalist tracked her down in 1962. What they found shocked them to the core. Although the reporter was surely aware that Lake wanted nothing to do with the glitz and glam of Hollywood anymore, likely nothing could have prepared them for the truth. The journalist found the great Veronica Lake working as a cocktail waitress at Martha Washington Hotel in Manhattan, where she was also living under the name Connie de Toth. The discovery awakened new interest in the long-lost Lake, with fans even sending her scads of money. One of the people who got wind of Lake's situation was none other than her old fiery lover Marlon Brando. The minute he heard, he got someone to send her a check for $1,000. This time, Lake's reaction was much different. Although she likewise didn't cash it, she did save the check as a memento of her glory days, even framing it in her home so she could show friends. The whole situation was wonderfully heartwarming and wholesome for her fans. Nonetheless, it still ruined her life. After Lake's rediscovery in the cocktail bar, something shifted in the former star. Once again, she began to feel Hollywood's inexorable pull, even after so narrowly escaping it. Within months, she gave in, and in the next few years, she jumped back into entertainment, taking on television and film roles and putting out an autobiography. The autobiography of Veronica Lake. It's just there was one thing missing. Beauty is a religion in the image-conscious world of Hollywood, and Veronica Lake was no longer beautiful. Years of alcohol abuse left her haggard and looking much older than her mid-40s age. As one reporter who met her at the time harshly put it, she looked like a cleaning lady. Although Lake's autobiography laments not spending enough time with her children, her in-person comments reveal a dark truth. By the end of her life, Lake seemingly couldn't trust anyone, not even her own flesh. As she put it in a late interview, "I am not going to hang on to my blood, nor am I going to allow them to hang on to me. I know what was done to me by my mother, and I'm not going to do that." Poor Lake was irrevocably twisted and damaged, and sadly, she didn't even get a break in death. In June 1973, Lake was still touring for the promotion of her autobiography through the United States. While passing through Vermont, she began to experience violent, debilitating stomach pains and had to put the tour on pause to go see a local doctor immediately. When they looked her over, they only had stomach-dropping news to give. After years of drinking like Humphrey Bogart playing the male lead in a film noir, Veronica Lake had advanced cirrhosis of the liver, and the medics only gave her a few weeks to live. As with so much else in her life, Lake got nothing better than the bare minimum. In early July 1973, just as doctors predicted, Lake passed of acute hepatitis. Although Lake suffered continually from the idea that she had no talent, she once said, "You could put all the talent I had into your left eye and still not suffer from impaired vision." And people like Raymond Chandler backed up her insecurities. Other people in Hollywood often praised her skill and allure. The problem, her I Married a Witch director Renee Claire said, was that she was a very gifted girl, but she didn't believe she was gifted. Veronica Lake had always been one of the most tormented stars in Hollywood, and her mother eventually revealed the devastating reason why. According to the matriarch, doctors diagnosed Lake with schizophrenia from a young age. According to her, this accounted for Lake's irritability, mood swings, and sometimes irrational decision making. And that's not all. Today, one common interpretation for Lake's ruinous drinking habit is that it was a coping mechanism and self-medication for her condition, helping her to run away not just from Hollywood and her crippling insecurities, but from the horrors of her mind as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.